I just made the biggest doll I own, and it was completely by accident. Let me explain. If you joined me in one of my latest videos, then you know I stayed up till some very early hours in the morning sculpting my very own BJD mermaid completely from scratch. As you can see, I've already printed out some of the pieces, and this is where things got a little concerning. I guess I should have expected her to be a bit on the larger side because of the nature of my most recent dolls, but my brain was still struggling to comprehend what I just got myself into. But let's just take one step at a time and start painting, shall we? I'm obviously going to need a lot of green paint, so I'm mixing a custom color in this old fake eyelash packaging. Fortunately, the green paint was pretty opaque and went over the blue filament pretty nicely. However, I can't say the same thing for the red. It took many layers. I really should have thought about that before printing all these pieces in blue, but oh well. Now, if you think this is a slightly weird color combination, then you probably missed my last video where I designed this entire watermelon themed mermaid in Procreate. I'll leave all of the links in the description so you can have a wonderful binge session and truly see my entire process for bringing one of my favorite illustrations to life. In the drawing phase, I settled on the idea of giving her skin a swirl pattern to tie back to the veins you kind of see on the inside of a watermelon. Again, some of you may already know this. I use a fine nail brush to paint those swirls on all of the red bits. Here the swirls look really bright and intense, but that's on purpose. I'm going to do several wash layers to make them more subtle and look like they are actually under the skin a bit. If you don't already know, a wash is basically a little bit of paint mixed with a whole bunch of water. We're going to see how these pieces turned out in a little bit, but while they're drying, let's work on the face. I 3D printed the head on my little resin printer buddy in the basement, and the next morning I gave it a trip in the wash and cure station. The print came out perfectly, and after very little sanding, it's time to paint her the correct color. When all the paint is dry, I go ahead and blush around her eyes and cheeks with some black and purplish chalk pastels. She was so much fun to paint because of how different her face is from my other dolls, which just adds to my excitement for some upcoming projects. When I'm done blushing, I add those same swirl patterns from earlier all over her face. I of course wash over everything like I did before and do another round of blushing to make sure the swirls really look like they are part of her skin. Here you can see they're subtle, but they look really nice. I do a little bit of work off camera, which actually wasn't that much, just adding her eye lines and her seed beauty marks. Now I'm carefully painting on her lower lashes, making them as nice and fluffy as I can. For this I switched to a longer nail brush, which I've heard is supposed to somehow help make it easier to paint fine lines like this. I've also started using gouache for the eyelashes, which also helps a lot. Off camera again, I paint her other eye and her little horns. When that last layer of Mrs. Super Clear is dry, I paint on some UV resin to make those details extra shiny. After it's cured, I add on her very dramatic upper eyelashes. Her two normal eyes are just black, so I didn't show the process for making them, but this is how she looks when everything is glued in place. Now we can go back and deal with the tail. Here you can see how those red pieces from earlier turned out. And now we can give the rest of the tail some much needed attention. For a reference, I was inspired by the paint jobs on these silicone mermaid tails. The stripe-like patterns did a great job of mimicking the outside of the watermelon just like I did in my sketch, which is what the tail is supposed to be. I take my tiny little brush and paint all of those stripes on all of those pieces. This took quite a while and a lot of snack breaks. When all of those pieces are dry, I go over them again, this time adding a darker border. Now, this next step is extremely important, so pay attention. I take my brush, pick up some darker green paint, then paint over everything I just painted because the next morning I hated it and thought the entire thing looked too flat and lifeless. I figured you wouldn't want to watch the same thing twice, so I painted it again off camera, this time adding a fade to a lighter green in the middle of the front of the tail. I also hand defined a few of the scales. This brand of matte varnish is actually never matte, so I figured it would add just enough shine to the tail to make it look slightly wet. Here's some of the dry pieces, and as you can tell, this is nowhere near matte, but it works perfectly for this project. To add another level of protection, I place a few strips of felt on the inside of each piece. This will also help keep the joints nice and stiff. While I was doing all of that, some of the pieces for the fins finished printing, so now I can clean them up and paint them too. Now that almost all of her pieces have been printed and painted, I can now string everything together. I'm struggling here a bit to show all of her on camera, but the tail so far is looking great. I typically leave on the extra elastic overnight just to make sure everything settles correctly. Now that she's all strung together, we can finally work on the hair. This part is going to take a lot out of me, so it's about time I take an actual watermelon snack break. It was very sweet, by the way. I'm going to use a combination of this dark green braiding hair and this neon green braiding hair. Like usual, I'm going to glue the hair on the back of the head first. Then move to gluing the rest on the partial wig I made for the front like I did in the last video. This got really messy, really fast, so again I had to do a little bit of work off camera, but this is how she's looking so far. Even though I actually don't like the color green, I'm really happy with how she's turning out. I still have quite a lot of this dark green hair left over, more than you might think, so if you have any recommendations, feel free to leave some in the comments. For her details, I wanted to keep it fairly simple. She has this chest plate and some bracelets in this swirly like water pattern. I go over to Blender to sculpt them out, then print them on my resin printer. The paint job on these are really simple, I just need to make them black. Now we ran into a bit of a problem with her fins. Long story short, I was originally planning on using polymer clay, but then our 15-year-old oven decided to finally die, so I tried baking them in our mini oven, but then I burned them, and then realized polymer clay wasn't going to work even if I didn't burn it, so I went back to printing it, but then I had to slice down the bottom fin because it was way too big to fit on the resin printer bed. It was a lot of back and forth to get these tail fins printed, or done at all, but it worked out. When I have all of the pieces, I paint them red and the seeds on them black, then gloss over everything so it actually looks like a watermelon slice. I can now finally string and glue those on the body. With a few more small details like styling her hair and adding fake water droplets with UV resin, she's finally ready for her photo shoot. What fruit are you excited to see me turn into a doll next? Food is always going to inspire me, so this is definitely going to be a series I'm going to revisit on my channel. Like I mentioned earlier, if you want to see the full process of me bringing this doll to life from an illustration, make sure you check out these two videos here. And with that all being said, Thank you so much for watching. Stay sweet, and I'll see you all next time.